Well, hello. It's just me this morning, although I'll be on with Kathy later in the day. But I did want to take a brief moment to say thank you. Um, when I woke up this morning, I got a note in my inbox from the publisher, Sage, indicating that my journal paper had been downloaded, accessed, whatever, more than 2,000 times. And for me, that is a bit overwhelming. I didn't expect any kind of anything really when I wrote it. I wrote it back in August of last year, submitted it to the process, and heard nothing at all. And then a big flurry of activity in last month, and absolute panic around navigating the reviewer site and turning it in wrong many times, asking for clarification, getting none, and eventually getting it in the shape that they wanted, and through and accepted and published and all of that. And then, kind of the sharing of it, and the absolute shock that folks are sharing it on Instagram and LinkedIn and Substack and emails and whatever. But through all of that effort, over 2,000 downloads in less than 10 days, I'm absolutely shocked. So I'm navigating, I don't know, a lot of different kind of feelings at the moment. One is the kind of, wow, I am genuinely touched by the sports and the encouragement and things that people have said about what they found in the paper, and how it impacted their practice or their family or whatever. And I love that that has happened. And I'm very happy that has happened, and I'm very overwhelmed at the same time. And as a person who's not really kind of been visible in the world, I don't really have a lot of scripts for this, and so my mitigation isn't as fluid. But please do know that it means the world to me when you share your feelings about the writings, and I mean not just the journal, but articles and whatnot. And so, speaking of articles, I had a bit of flood over the last, I don't know, a week, producing 30 pieces, right? And I know that sounds immense, but I think when I decided to rearrange things in my life, I had not planned on writing a field guide for Gestalt processing or anything like that. It just kind of came to me. And then I organized like an outline, and I sent that out into the world from Substack. And the results, beyond expectations. Not that I had really any expectations, but I was, again, kind of overwhelmed with the response that came from everybody saying, "Oh yes, Jamie, please, write this." And I had planned on doing a few other things. The story of maths was actually kind of first, right? And adding the credential for single subject credential for teaching English, was along that thing. And I realized that no, I really do need to do the field guide first, and there's some other things happening in my life that I need to sort out, and then I can do the teaching credential edition and all of that kind of stuff. So it kind of, all of this made it clear to me what priorities should be. And then, typical me, say, but the field is not ready. The relational field is not ready for the development of the field guide. We have to sort out some things. And so from that standpoint, I started writing all of those articles. And as more things came to mind and more things formed and things would arrive, and this time, not so much poetry, but, let's get the wording right about things. And so the first set of pieces, the Unmasking series, was really from the standpoint of, recognition and the reorganization that happens in your mind when you come to these realizations like, oh crap, I'm autistic, what now? Oh crap, ADHD, what now? Oh crap, Gestalt processing, what now? So I wrote a piece in the middle of that about late identified, outside of the kind of the series or whatever, but just late identified things. I was 34 when I received my first diagnosis around neurotype, and that was under the regime of DSM-4, and it was Asperger's disorder. And so I wrote a piece kind of reconciling how this language proficiency that slotted me into Asperger's and not into autism could then suddenly be in DSM-5 autism support level 2 for language, to try to reconcile that, because I know, for many people there might be a confusion around that. And so I try to explain it as best as possible. And from the standpoint of late identification of autism, what does that mean? And I was speaking with a colleague the other day whose child happens to be autistic, as what it means in terms of awareness of these things, right? And so I would say, from the standpoint of autism, I was 34. So there was no transition, right? I got a word for how my brain and system, sensitivities, all these kinds of things happen. And so there was no, 33 years old Jamie was just typical. And at 34 years old, Jamie was autistic. There was none of that. There is that kind of retrocausal rewriting of scripts and memories and stuff. I've always been autistic. I just not having the name for it. There was no recognition officially, documentation. There was no awareness at the time, 1970s, 1980s, that these types of things existed, right? So I was quirky, I was shy, I was a pain in the arse. All of these kinds of things that parents back then would say of a young person who is autistic. So a lot of us, and I don't use the term that much myself, I just say I'm autistic. But other people find it important to add that identifier of late identification. And so I want to honor that by saying that I too, as old as I am now, I am late identified. And then from the autism came the ADHD, right? And likewise, there is no pre-diagnosis Jamie that was, not wired in that way. And so our brains work in the standpoint of, oh yeah, all of these things that happened, when I was a child, when I was in school, all of that kind of stuff. Yeah, that was the ADHD. And then very much later, when I started, in secondary classrooms and started to interrogate things about literacy and so on, then I put all of those pieces together about my language support needs and, my literacy journey, being essentially functionally illiterate up until my 30s, and all of that kind of stuff I've already told you about many, many times, with Gestalt processing and my kind of evolution of thought. At the time, the scripts that I was given from psychiatry, non-verbal autism, and, then trying to separate non-verbal and non-vocal from non-speaking, right? And all of the different reasons why someone would not utter, and trying to dissect all of those different pathways. And so for myself, I began to realize that I am a Gestalt processor as defined by, and all of this kind of stuff. And then just went, deep dive on that some years ago. And so I would say I'm late identified as a Gestalt processor, right? And, out of respect for language therapists and in American language pathologists, I've kind of lately separated the language and the processing to say that I'm not just a Gestalt processor of language, which I am, but I'm a Gestalt processor of everything in my life. I'm whole to part. It's that simple. And so in everything I do, I'm kind of whole to part. And so I start writing that way, but then also writing backwards in my memory space and my script space. And so I know to people who are not themselves Gestalt processors or who are not themselves autistic or whatever, sometimes it looks like we're rewriting the past. And indeed we are rewriting the past. Our memories, our scripts are being rewritten. And so from a standpoint of that, it's not inauthentic. It's just now I have a word for it. And so I'm going to use it. And I'm going to use it retrocausally and retroactively. And so, to that end, I've never really gone back, although I have the ability to do so with Substack. I've never really gone back and edited anything I've written of the almost 1,900 pieces now since 2022. I've updated some of them, certainly, as things have changed in my life or we've received new information about something. But I'd like to leave the older pieces there untouched, because I love to have that kind of tracking. Like, here's where I was 3 years ago writing, and recognizing, in self-reflection, just how much I've grown as a writer. And that was the purpose of Substack and my previous work on Blogger as kind of occupational therapy and parking these very long-form gestalts somewhere. And then, having the ability to share them with you and that you enjoy them and that you share them amongst your friends. And that's amazing to me. It really is. And I can't tell you how, overjoyed that makes me feel. But I can see, because I've been writing, I can see the evolution of thought. I can see the evolution of identity. I can see the evolution of my ability to communicate ideas and how, I don't know, kind of rudimentary it was in the beginning. Like, I had published journal papers and stuff in my previous life in forensic science, and it was all very kind of regimented and so on. I wasn't very creative because I didn't have a space to be creative. And so I wasn't. It was just, technical stuff and procedural stuff. And I would write, how to write a forensic science report, and I would post it and people would like it, much in the same way now. But, my work during the Obama administration and the reform of forensic science and all of that kind of stuff, I was following the therapeutic advice that I should write these things down that will help me practice with language, and then I can park them. Back then it was in Blogger, and people followed and people borrowed, and then I wasn't so visible. I didn't want to be. Quite frankly, I'm very shy and very kind of nervous about being out in front of things. So all of this is very new for me. I didn't think 15 years ago or whatever of doing something like this, recording just kind of a stream of consciousness video, right? But I will, I think, do these from time to time just to check in, I dearly enjoy my time chatting with Kathy on the weekends. She happens to be in Dublin and training people to do this amazing thing with sound. And I'm very fascinated by that. But, it's not really in my practice, but I'm still very curious about that. And so, she's in Dublin, training people, teaching people, helping them to grow, sharing her knowledge. And of course it's Dublin, so I'm sure there's very good crack there. She'll find it. And we'll chat tomorrow about that. But nevertheless, I do want to come on from time to time and without any kind of regularity, just to check in and, to say thank you, really. Deeply thank you. And thank you for those of you that are financial supporters, definitely. Those that have subscribed, to the free service to receive the emails and that you share them around, and those that follow and, engage on notes, and those that, see the stuff that I put on Instagram and send messages or just like and comment or whatever. I just want to say thank you because, for somebody who has been kind of anonymous for so many decades, it has been kind of overwhelming these last few years. But at the same time, everybody has been very gentle and with the possible exception of the naysayers. But everybody has been very gentle and supportive, and I do appreciate that, which kind of leads me into like where the series is and where it's going. We did the unmasking thing, and so I have the safety now to be unmasked in almost every aspect of my life. Unfortunately, I live in a rural part of California that isn't very supportive of a lot of things, but people like me in various ways that my identity is expressed, not just one, but quite a few. So, but to that extent, I'm out here in public, I'm on video, all this kinds of stuff. And if people really wanted to find out about me, it'd be very easy to do. So that unmasking is very scary, right? What does it mean to be a Gestalt processor? What does it mean to be autistic? What does it imply? And are you safe to do it, right? And so once you've done that, then what, right? So you get out into the world and you realize that your brain runs on a different clock, especially if you're a Gestalt processor who happens to be autistic and ADHD and all of that stuff. And so I dive into Chronos and Kairos and what that means, right? Because it was necessary to explain those fundamental contexts of clock time versus human time, essentially, and what they have to mean in terms of the Gestalt processing experience. And, all of the stuff that we have, all of these scripts that we have come from medicine and they come from psychiatry. And I'm a big believer in science, but a lot of these systems were created to control and to change, to improve humanity. The eugenics movement, horrible. But I wanted to write from a different standpoint, and I always kind of say, I'm a sample size of one. I'm writing from within the system, within the weather system, within my own experience. But that's all I have, right? I'm not a psychiatrist. And so from that standpoint, we're dealing with kind of my own interpretations. And again, tickled to death that people are relating to it. And so we explore executive functioning not from the standpoint of deficit or from the standpoint of you must buy this new planner or you must use post-it notes in a certain way, but just to understand your system, where all of these things come from in your mind, how they've been, placed there over time and what we can do about it. And then I wanted to explore where we are right now as I record this in the series about non-speaking. And mainly I am kind of retrocausally scripting my own experience, because when I was first presented with diagnoses and I was given that kind of non-verbal autism label when we went from Asperger's to ASD, and it never quite made sense to me because I can't speak, right? But I was not quick to speak. And so from that standpoint, we have the dialogue around delay and disorder and all of these timings that are expected. And although I don't have memory, obviously, of like the first few years of my life, there are the familial anecdotes. And so that's where the BBC presenter thing comes in about, wee Jamie. And there wasn't the typical babble. There wasn't the mama and dada and all that kind of stuff. There was nothing. And then there was everything. And it was baffling to people, especially in the 1970s. They hadn't any word for that. So I wanted to explain that, and along the way, I kind of did something, I don't know, I was very nervous about, let's say, very risky, but I proposed a stage in the NLA, in the Natural Language Acquisition Framework that Marge is so famous for and so wonderful for putting out there into the world. But I proposed a stage 0, right? I didn't want to modify stage 1, but I wanted to explain, again, from my own standpoint, that there must be something before stage 1. Otherwise, where does this echolalia come from? Where does it originate? Where is it stored, processed, and all of these kinds of things? So from that standpoint, I propose in my pieces a stage 0, right? That winter stage where things are germinating underground, but you don't see anything above ground, right? There's snow, there's frost, but there's no lack of activity, right? Things are happening underground. And so I kind of described, how it was for me, the very unique circumstances that I grew up with. And then, as we move forward in it, I'll talk a little bit about, AAC, complete silence, right? Those for whatever reason, biomechanical or whatever, they will never utter, which is not my experience. And then also, again, the next two pieces, there's a little element of my life in there where speech is coerced, where adults in your life want to hear a very specific thing from you. Say thank you, say please, and so they're prompting. And then what happens when prompting becomes excessive? And then also, from that standpoint, the right to not speak if you don't feel moved to speak. Like, why should I speak? And so that kind of bridges into some of my professional life where I've had enough. I'm overwhelmed. I cannot do something professionally that I'm being asked to do in a meeting or something like that. Can I turn in a written response? Must I get up in front of the group if I'm feeling overwhelmed? So these types of things where, yes, I have access to speech. Yes, I can mitigate. And, I've written previously about what happens after stage 6. But that requires safety, that requires health, that requires a lot of things to happen because as many adults are shocked to know, my brain still does not work in words. It's a translation, right? And so from that standpoint, the final movement, as I've called it, I talk about I'm trying to pick up all the little pieces and make all the organizations and things. So I wrote a piece over on sensual residue a while back about essentially a mathematical proof. And it comes out of a conversation that I was having with colleagues in the maths department who are very Cartesian, very Euclidean. Everything's solid, everything in its place. And I was always thinking very Victorianly about the way they said that. So I wrote a proof from a non-Euclidean geometric standpoint where I propose 5 dimensions of coherence for a Gestalt processing mind. And I wrote it as a mathematical proof and shared it with colleagues, and they kind of giggled at the first read, and the second read they were kind of diving into it because, as we all know, as residents of planet Earth, there are the 3 cardinal directions, X, Y, and Z on a grid. And then there's time, and time is linear. And I don't upset the cardinal dimensions, but I do upset the 4th and 5th dimension in this proof. So that you'll see in a few days, and I hope you enjoy that. But in order for me to do the next piece, which really kind of dives into meaning time, the 5th dimension, I needed to put that proof together. And so this is part of kind of housekeeping, if you will. And then from that standpoint, I kind of dive into the history and politics of why analytic is the norm. And from the standpoint of a very kind of, curious quotation about the fish not really recognizing the water, right? If you're born in the water, you don't realize that that's the medium by which you move through things. And so why analytic thought is the cultural default in the global north. And so I write a piece about that, about the invisible water. And then in the middle of me writing this, and I'm sitting at, home and having tea, and it's very early in the morning, and I have colleagues that are up at that time too. And I receive an email, and it pops up and says, "Oh, hey, here's thus and such thing from, something that I'm going to do next week, and because I know you need the support, I'm going to give this to you early." And then I read it, and my mind starts popping again about that kind of translation labor that we Gestalt processors must endure in the analytic world, right? And so as I do the first read over these documents, and I'm thinking, like, as long as I've known this person, they have not kind of in their mind come to the realization of how I operate, right? And so all of that unpaid invisible labor that we as Gestalt processors do to accommodate our employers, to accommodate, our educators and so on. And so I write a piece about that translation labour. And then I wrap it up a bit, kind of getting a bit whimsical again, and talking about the Fae folk and the forest. And, I'm at this point, I'm kind of exasperated because I've been writing so much. And I just wanted to kind of tie in that aspect of lexicography, where you have this person who does not belong to the community that they're studying, and they're translating things that they see but they don't really understand, right? And I had written a piece a while ago about the lexicographer and the Fae, and it was kind of cheeky, I think. And so this one kind of circles around to that, to say, we as humans, we could never quite interpret Fae folk and the Fae worlds. And, even across the different Celtic nations, right? The view of the Fae is slightly different, but they all are kind of harmonious. The Cymry, they see it one way, Scots see it a different way, etc. So I kind of bring that in from the standpoint of I want to be able to let the reader know that I'm not trying to play a lexicographer. I'm trying to write from within the weather storm, right? I'm not using radar to predict things and describe things that I only have kind of an observational relationship to, but I do want to kind of let the reader know that I'm standing in the middle of it, and that's, that sample size of one thing is happening. So with that in mind, and if I count kind of what I predict will be the field guide page count, I think I'll have about 1,000 pages of stuff around Gestalt processing, like if I was to print out all these articles and stuff that I've referenced, right? And so I've gathered them all on the field guide outline article, and then I've pinned that as the main article when you get to Outside. And, not through an article, but just outside substack.com. That's the first thing you see, right? The field guide to Gestalt Minds, that's the kind of outline thing that I'm like proposing, I guess, or parking for now. And then I have this whole list of all of these things that I've just discussed with you. But also, there is a very small little portion at the top that says kind of essential pre-reading. And so from that standpoint, the very first link there is The Speed of Dark. And that is all of the stuff that I did around the GLP conference last year with Kathy. And so all of the articles, all the answers to questions and stuff, and also the pre-work and post-work I did for Barry Presents Uniquely Human podcast, which has yet to be released. So that alone is quite a bit of information. I wrote an article called The Last Mind Before the Ledger, talking about the history that we can find about Gestalt processing in the historical record, and where I think this analytic thing came along, and what makes it so dominant, and all of that. An article I wrote, that kind of speaks to, well, where are we going to get the money for this? If we orient around Gestalt Minds, if we accommodate Gestalt Minds, where's the money going to come from, right? All the naysayers always say this. And so that piece that I wrote previous called What If We'd Chosen the Commons explains the mathematics, the economics of who's going to pay for that. And then the link to me exploring the difference in diagnostics between Asperger's and ASD for myself. And then the link to my kind of cheeky look at what happened in the naysayers' office when my article was announced. So all of that stuff there, I don't know, aside from the outline, I think it's 35 pieces that page links to. And then The Speed of Dark links to 30, 40 more pages and so on. But this kind of recursivity and this choose your own adventure type thing is just the way that my brain works. And so I've never found a platform that can organize things that accommodate me completely. So this is, I'm learning, but this is kind of the best I can do for right now. So it's all organized in one place, but I guess it makes it easier for sharing and for discussion groups or whatever. But I just wanted to come on and kind of walk you through where I'm at right now. I've talked about putting out a field guide on stuff, and I'm thinking based on, how many parts and chapters and so on that I've organized in this, and I'm sure that will change a bit, but I'm thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 350 pages of a book. I've not really decided on a publisher, but I know traditional publishing models I don't really want, because when I wrote with Lived Places Publishing, the turnaround was almost a year from proposal to publishing, and it's very slow, and then you're slotting into their publishing schedule, and I want to get it out sooner than that. And so that leads me to kind of print-on-demand services. I'm a school teacher. I can't pay anybody to do anything. I have to do this myself, and I will. I can design books and that kind of stuff. That's not the issue. The issue is distribution. And so, as much as I don't like the company, there is one kind of elephant in this room, and that is Amazon and Kindle Direct. And so, with my copy of Vellum, I can write everything in Microsoft Word. I can organize it in Vellum or in InDesign. I do a cover in Photoshop, and I can get it to you sooner. I can get it to you in different formats. With Vellum, I can produce the print-ready PDF, and we can put the cover on it, and Amazon will print when people buy a copy. But I can also, at the same time, create electronic versions for EPUB or, for Apple or for Google marketplaces and stuff like that with the same documents. So that's why I like the tool Vellum for print and stuff. And then if I get into Vellum and I don't like the way it's going, I have InDesign, which is a very professional page layout program from Adobe that I'm very familiar with. So we'll see how that works, but it's a little bit more roundabout to do the electronic versions through InDesign. But nevertheless, I want to get it out faster than a year. So I'm hoping that things in my life will open up a bit so that I can have the time to write and edit and all of that stuff and send it on to proofreading and all of that kind of stuff. Hopefully by summertime. And then that will give, you the ability to have it, to read it on summer holiday, to send me notes saying, "Oh, Jamie, you've absolutely screwed this one up," and all of that stuff. And with Kindle Direct Publishing, I can take your feedback and I can update the file and change it in real time, where I cannot do that with like my autism book, where there are things that I want to change, but I cannot do it because it's published. So that's my thought on that, and I'm hoping that you'll leave me a comment on this video to let me know what you think about that. I know just being on Substack is political for some people, and they won't follow and read anything I put on there because of political stances. So I know it's a risk going with Amazon for printing and distribution, but there's no real viable alternative for somebody who wants the print copy to fold it open and to underline it and to bookmark it and all this kinds of stuff. I know for myself, I like electronics, but I also like the printed copy as well, especially if I can get it signed by the author. I just like the touch and the smell. I mean, it's a very sensory kind of experience for me with books. But when I'm doing things professionally, I like to have the electronic version for myself, and I can engage my tools with that and process it a lot better. So that's the update. Again, I kind of want to close with gratitude to say thank you very much for all the support and all the kind words, for all the sharing, for the downloading of the paper, and just my very deep gratitude for all of the support, financial and otherwise. But yes. And I hope you are all well, given all the events in the world and stuff. But yeah, I just wanted to come on today to say thank you. And Perhaps in another month or so I'll do it again. But yes, have a good day. Bye bye.